In this talk, I want to talk about how to get things done and more specifically, how to unpack your motivational DNA or, the key triggers that are particular to you that get you motivated when you need a boost of motivation. And before I get into that, I do want to say, and I've said this in a lot of other talks, that on any given day, I will rely on habit more than motivation. I look at motivation as um, lighter fluid, essentially. Motivation is what gets you going so you can build a habit. But in the long run, having a habit in place is what will get you and keep you doing something consistently. And I have another talk planned for that, so I'll get more into that later. So let's talk about motivation and some of the key switches for our motivation. And as I'm talking through some of these different variables, you'll probably notice which ones trigger you more in a positive sense. In other words, they get you fired up to do something. And instead of trying to change your structure, I would look to identify what are your key triggers and how can you leverage them as much as possible. So let's get to it. So the first one is the classic carrot or stick. In NLP, we call this toward motivation, where you're motivated to achieve something or experience something. You're moving towards something that you want, or away from motivation, which is getting away from pain or anything that's unpleasant that you want to avoid. Now, in my experience, and this is informal, but in my experience over the years, I would say many, many, many more people are more motivated to move away from things than they are to move towards things. So it's a good thing to know. I would say most people have a bit of both and lean towards the away from motivation. The other thing is I find that away from motivation tends to burn a bit hotter than toward motivation. People will do, as they say, more to avoid pain than they will to move into pleasure. So what do we want to do with this? First of all, notice which one you tend to do more often. And then really you want to stack both in your favor. If you have a goal or something you want to achieve, you want to build up a great prize so that you have something you're moving towards. And then you also want to build something really big and unpleasant that you're moving away from so that you're aimed in the same direction. Very often the place where people will get in trouble with this one is they want to move towards a prize or towards a goal, and at the same time there's something they're trying to avoid that's in the same direction. Maybe they want to go for a new degree, but they're thinking, oh, that will be difficult. So that's a mix of toward motivation and away from that are in the direction that they want to go. Instead, what you want to do is really build a big picture of what it will be like if you go for this new career, degree, whatever it is, and you want to accentuate how unpleasant it will be if you don't do that, so that the away from is pushing you forward and the toward is pulling you forward. So that's toward and away. Second factor that I want to talk about today is really the what we call chunk size, like how broken down is this activity? And um, it would seem that smaller chunks would be more palpable for everyone, but it's actually not the case. Most likely you have your particular chunk size that's most attractive to you or gets you to move forward. And again, you can use a blended approach. It's not like you have to do everything broken down really small or every goal really big. You can have a combination of those. You can paint a really huge picture and at the same time have it broken down so that both things are pulling you forward. What I would recommend is when you have a larger scale goal, hold it out and see it as a destination that you want to get to. You want to get to the top of the mountain, and at the same time break it down a couple levels and see how breaking it down, does that kick in your motivation more. And I'll give you an example. A lot of times when I'm working with people, I'll talk to them about maybe something like working out. And for some people, if if they paint a picture of what they'll be like if they get in shape, that's enough to get them going and to get them motivated. But other people need it broken down into really small bite-sized pieces. And then once it's broken down enough, they just kick into gear. I'm very much like this. As soon as I have something broken down enough, I just go and I don't think about it too much. Okay, the next factor is whether the motivation is inherent to whatever you're doing, or what I would call it's a means motivation. In other words, it's what your goal is a means to some other outcome. So inherent motivation might be something like dancing or skiing or cooking, where the doing of it is inherently pleasurable to you. And this can be incredibly powerful. Like for some people, like playing a musical instrument, just the idea of it pulls them in. Or video games. Definitely, people play video games because they enjoy them. It's a lot of fun, so they just jump in. So that's inherent motivation. Means motivation is when you're doing something, like if we go back to this idea of going back for another degree or taking a course or something like that, you might be drawn to the activity of going back to school or taking a class if you find that subject matter inherently motivating to you. However, very often the reason someone's doing it is because they're imagining what it will get them when they're done, right? So, for example, I worked with somebody one time who was getting a law degree, and they were interested in law, but the schoolwork was a lot of work. It felt like work to them. But when they focused on being done and being a lawyer, then they got more motivated and they were able to drive through. So kind of like toward in a way, we want to stack both of these in our favor. So in terms of inherent motivation, you want to try to wrap the doing of the activity with as many things that you find pleasurable as possible. So if you're taking a course, for example, you would, if you love learning, you want to build as much learning into taking that course as possible. That's pretty easy. Or if you're somebody who enjoys playing games, you want to wrap the idea of a game around taking that class. Or maybe you're somebody who just loves competing. So if you make it a bit of a competition with your friends or colleagues, that might make it more inherently motivating to you. Now, on the means motivation side, what you want to do is paint a huge picture about what will be all the implications if I get this done. Like if I take this class, what will I be able to do when I'm finished? What, will it open me up to a new job? Will it help me grow my business? Or if I work out, I'll feel healthier, I'll have more energy. So you want to build this big picture on the other side of your goal, and that will build the motivation into that. And the last time frame, which relates, the last factor that relates to the one I just said is time frame. And what I mean by time frame is when you think about the goal or the activity, are you imagining that you're in the time frame you're in right now and you're doing that activity, or are you mentally projecting into the future? Because both of those will have a huge effect on your motivation. If the task isn't inherently pleasurable, then being in the moment and imagining doing that task will be unpleasant, right? Like if you don't like doing dishes, if you're imagining doing dishes, that's going to be unpleasant. So there, it would be more beneficial to shift to the future time frame and imagine what it will feel like when you're done. So you're mentally stepping into the future. Now there are two ways. I don't want to go into too much detail. There are two ways to think about the future. One is where you're sitting in the present and you're picturing the future off in the future. Maybe you're seeing yourself in the picture off in the future. That's one way, and that can be very motivating. So in my dishes example, I would see myself with my kitchen clean and everything wonderful. The other way to experience the future is to step into it as if it's now. So I would imagine that it's a little bit later in the day and everything is cleaned up and tidy, and I get to relax and really enjoy myself. So there I'm shifting to the present. I'm sorry, I'm shifting to the future perspective, but I'm stepping into it as if it's now. Um, in the same way that the inherent and means motivation both could work to our advantage, you can do this with your time frame as well. Um, you might want to accentuate how unpleasant it is if you don't do anything, and that's your present time frame. And then imagine that future time frame when it's done, and that will tend to push you forward. Um, so I talked about toward and away from motivation, chunk size, like how much something is broken down, inherent versus means motivation, and present time frame versus future time frame. And what I would recommend as a way of kind of practicing this and integrating it into your behavior is anytime you have something on your to-do list, take one of these switches, or, sometimes they're like an on-off switch and sometimes they're like a continuum, and play with that one factor. Crank up the away from motivation and see if that pushes you forward, or crank up the toward motivation and see what that does. And take them one at a time and really get a sense of how you like to set the dials, and then start layering them or stacking them together. And I find if you really take a moment to structure the way you're experiencing the thought of this activity, it can really push you and pull you into activity so that you can get things done. So I hope you have a lot of fun with that and would love to hear about it.